Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the heaviest meaning. In a world where royal protocols dictate every move, where cameras capture every breath, and where public duty often overshadows private emotion, one simple act can reveal the depth of love that exists beneath the crown. This is the story of how Catherine discovered that being cherished isn't always about grand declarations or public displays. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments when someone who could command armies chooses instead to simply hold your hand in the darkness. What happened on that autumn evening in 2019 would forever change how Catherine understood her place not just in the royal family, but in the heart of the man who would one day be king. It wasn't a moment that made headlines. It wasn't captured by the press. But for Catherine, it became the moment she truly knew she was home. The October rain drummed against the windows of Kensington Palace, with an intensity that matched Catherine's inner turmoil. She stood in the drawing room, still wearing the navy dress from the morning's official engagement, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her teacup. The day had been particularly challenging, filled with criticism from the press about a comment she'd made during a school visit, and the weight of constant scrutiny felt heavier than usual. Catherine had grown accustomed to many things since joining the royal family. The protocol, the schedules, the endless public appearances where every smile had to be perfect and every word carefully chosen. But what she hadn't quite mastered was the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the quiet moments, when the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds went home. Tonight was one of those moments. The palace felt unusually quiet. William was in his study, handling correspondence that couldn't wait, and the children were already tucked into bed after their evening routine. Catherine found herself wandering through the familiar rooms, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors, each step echoing the restlessness she felt inside. She paused at one of the tall windows, watching the rain create intricate patterns as it slid down the glass, distorting the lights of London beyond. Earlier that day, during the school visit, she had been asked about the pressures of royal life by a particularly persistent journalist. Her response, which she thought was honest and heartfelt, had been twisted by the evening news into something that sounded ungrateful and privileged. The headlines were already forming in her mind. Duchess complains about royal duties. Or, Catherine's royal blues. She had learned to develop thick skin over the years. But some days, the weight of always having to be perfect felt overwhelming. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted her thoughts. She expected to see one of the staff members making their evening rounds, but instead, William appeared in the doorway. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and there was something in his expression that told her he had been watching her for a moment before announcing his presence. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice gentle but knowing. He had seen the news coverage, of course. Nothing involving his family escaped his attention, especially when it concerned Catherine. She turned from the window, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied, but even as she said it, she knew he could see right through her. After all these years together, first as friends at university, then as a couple navigating the complexities of a very public relationship, and now as husband and wife, he had learned to read the subtle signs of her distress. William crossed the room slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. He had always been protective of her, but over the years, that protection had evolved into something deeper, an understanding of the unique pressures she faced as someone who had chosen to love him despite everything that choice would cost her. He knew that she had given up a normal life, privacy, and the simple freedom to make mistakes without the world watching and judging. "The children are asleep," he said as he reached her, his hands finding her shoulders. His touch was warm through the fabric of her dress, grounding her in a way that nothing else could. "George wanted to show you his drawing from school, but I promised him he could give it to you at breakfast." Catherine's expression softened at the mention of their eldest son. George had recently started showing real talent for art, and his enthusiasm for sharing his creations with her never failed to brighten even her darkest days. "What did he draw this time?" she asked, and for the first time that evening her smile was genuine. "A family portrait," William replied, his own smile reflecting hers. "Though I must warn you, he's given you very long hair and what appears to be a crown made entirely of flowers." Charlotte insisted on adding her own artistic touches, which mainly involved covering everyone in glitter. The image made Catherine laugh softly, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. This was what mattered, these moments with her family, these simple exchanges that reminded her why she had chosen this life. Not the titles or the protocol or the public appearances, but the love that existed within these walls, protected from the outside world's judgment. But as quickly as the moment of lightness had come, the weight of the day's criticism settled back on her. She turned back toward the window, her reflection staring back at her in the dark glass. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for all this," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. It was a vulnerable admission, one she rarely allowed herself to voice, even to William. William moved to stand behind her, his presence a solid warmth at her back. He didn't immediately respond, and in the silence Catherine worried that she had revealed too much, shown too much weakness. But then his arms came around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest, and she felt him press a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Do you remember," he said softly, his voice close to her ear, "that first Christmas at Sandringham, when you were so nervous about meeting my grandmother properly for the first time?" She had been terrified, spending weeks researching protocol and practicing her curtsy until William finally told her she was overthinking everything. The Queen, as it turned out, had been more interested in Catherine's opinion of the Christmas pudding than in her ability to follow every rule perfectly. "You wore that blue dress," William continued, "and you were so worried about saying the wrong thing that you barely spoke during dinner. But afterward, when we were all in the drawing room, Louis started fussing, and without even thinking about it, you scooped him up and started singing that little song you always sang to calm him down." Catherine remembered that moment. Prince Louis had been going through a difficult phase, crying inconsolably at the worst possible moments, and she had developed a repertoire of silly songs that seemed to work magic on his temperament. That night, with the entire royal family watching, she had forgotten about protocol entirely and simply done what came naturally. "And do you know what my grandmother said to me later that evening?" William asked, his arms tightening slightly around her. She said, "That girl has the heart for this. The rest can be learned." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness but from something deeper, a recognition of love that transcended titles and expectations. The Queen's words, shared in private with William and now with her, carried a weight that no amount of public criticism could diminish. But what if she was wrong? Catherine whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. What if I never learn the rest? What if I keep making mistakes, saying the wrong things, disappointing people? William turned her around in his arms so that she was facing him. In the soft light of the drawing room, his blue eyes were serious but filled with something that made her heart skip. The same look he had given her when he proposed, when they were married, when each of their children was born. It was a look of absolute certainty, unwavering love, and complete faith in her. "Catherine," he said, his hands coming up to cup her face. "You think the heart of this job is never making mistakes, but that's not it at all. The heart of it is caring enough to keep trying even when it's hard. It's choosing to serve even when the service isn't appreciated. It's showing up again and again because you believe in something bigger than yourself." His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "And you do all of that every single day. You do it when you visit hospitals and hold hands with patients who are scared. You do it when you sit on the floor with children who just need someone to listen to them. You do it when you stand beside me at state dinners and make conversation with people who intimidate even me."
Catherine wanted to protest, to point out all the ways she felt inadequate, but William wasn't finished. "The press doesn't see what I see," he continued.
"They don't see you up at night researching the charities we're visiting so you can ask meaningful questions. They don't see you practicing speeches until they're perfect because you want to do justice to the causes you represent. They don't see you checking on the children's homework after a 12-hour day of official duties because being their mother is just as important to you as being a duchess." As William spoke, Catherine felt something shift inside her. The criticism that had felt so crushing earlier began to lose its power, not because it disappeared, but because it was being overshadowed by something stronger. The recognition of her own worth reflected in the eyes of someone who truly knew her. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease and the first hints of stars were becoming visible through the breaking clouds. Inside the warmth of their home, surrounded by the life they had built together, Catherine felt herself returning to center. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new opportunities to make mistakes, new chances to face criticism. But tonight, in this moment, she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks following that rainy October evening brought a whirlwind of activities that tested Catherine's renewed confidence. There was a state visit from the Danish royal family, complete with elaborate dinners and ceremonial events where every gesture was choreographed and every conversation carried diplomatic weight. Catherine navigated these challenges with growing assurance, remembering William's words about showing up and caring enough to keep trying. But it was during the quieter moments, the spaces between public appearances, that she began to notice something she had somehow missed before. William's attention to her comfort and happiness wasn't limited to moments of crisis. It was woven into the fabric of their daily life in ways so subtle that she had almost taken them for granted. On a particularly busy Tuesday, Catherine had back-to-back engagements that started with a breakfast meeting with education ministers and ended with an evening reception for military families. The schedule was punishing, with barely enough time between events to change clothes, let alone catch her breath. During the brief car ride between her third and fourth appointments, she noticed that her phone contained a text message sent hours earlier. It was from William, sent during his own packed morning of meetings. Emergency chocolate stash in your briefcase. Left compartment. You're doing brilliantly. P.S. George's drawing is on your desk for when you get home. Catherine opened her briefcase and found, tucked behind her prepared remarks for the military reception, a small package of her favorite dark chocolate truffles. The ones from the little shop in Scotland they had discovered during their honeymoon. Such a simple gesture, but one that spoke to an intimate knowledge of what would make her day better. He had thought of her comfort during his own busy morning, and had taken the time to ensure she had something to look forward to. This wasn't unusual, she realized as she savored one of the chocolates. There were always little signs of his thoughtfulness if she paid attention. Her morning coffee was always exactly the right temperature because he had learned to time his own routine so that he could prepare hers just as she was finishing her shower. When they traveled for official engagements, her favorite reading light was always packed, even though she never specifically requested it. During long receiving lines, when her feet began to ache in formal shoes, he would somehow sense her discomfort and create small opportunities for her to shift her weight or take an almost imperceptible step back. That evening, despite her exhaustion, Catherine found herself studying William as they shared a late dinner in their private dining room. The children were in bed, and the palace staff had retired for the evening, leaving them with the rare luxury of an uninterrupted meal together. He was telling her about his day, about a particularly difficult conversation he'd had with government ministers about environmental policy, but she found herself distracted by the way he automatically refilled her water glass without interrupting his own story, how he had ordered her preferred wine even though she hadn't mentioned wanting any. "You're not listening to a word I'm saying," he observed with amusement, catching her studying him with that thoughtful expression he had come to recognize. "I am listening," Catherine protested, though she had to admit her attention had been divided. "You were talking about the resistance to the new conservation initiatives." "That was 10 minutes ago." William laughed. "I've moved on to complaining about the renovations to the East Wing. But clearly something else is on your mind." Catherine set down her fork and looked at him seriously. "How long have you been taking care of me in all these little ways?" The question seemed to surprise him.
"What do you mean? The chocolate today?"
"The way you always make sure I have exactly what I need, often before I realize I need it myself."
"The way you position yourself at public events so that I'm never standing in an awkward spot or talking to someone who makes me uncomfortable alone." William's expression grew thoughtful, as if he was considering something he had never really examined before. "I suppose it started at university," he said slowly. "Do you remember that time in our second year when you had that terrible flu and you were trying to convince everyone you were fine enough to attend that important lecture?" Catherine did remember. She had been running a fever but was worried about missing a crucial seminar. William had taken one look at her and declared that she was going straight back to bed, then had spent the entire day bringing her soup, taking detailed notes in the classes she was missing, and even charming her landlady into bringing up extra blankets. "I realized then that you have this tendency to put everyone else's needs ahead of your own," William continued. "You'll run yourself into the ground taking care of other people, making sure everyone around you is comfortable and happy. But you won't ask for what you need." "So I started paying attention, learning to anticipate, but that was years before we were even dating properly," Catherine pointed out. "I know." William's smile was soft, tinged with something that looked almost like wonder at his own realization. "I think I was already in love with you then, even if I wasn't ready to admit it to myself." Taking care of you felt as natural as breathing. The confession hung in the air between them, not because it was a surprise. They had both known for years that their love had roots that went back much further than their official courtship, but because it highlighted something profound about the foundation of their relationship. Even before romance, before royal duties and public scrutiny, there had been this, one person noticing what the other needed and quietly, consistently providing it. Catherine reached across the table to take his hand. "I never thanked you for that," she said. "For seeing me so clearly, for caring for me in ways I didn't even know I needed." "You don't need to thank me for loving you," William replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "But I want you to know that it's not a burden. It's never been a burden. Making you happy, making your life easier when I can. It makes me happy too." Later that evening, as they walked through the palace corridors toward their private quarters, Catherine found herself seeing their shared space with new eyes. The small changes that had appeared over the years, a more comfortable reading chair in her study, photographs positioned so she could see them from her desk, flowers that were always her favorites. All of it represented years of quiet attention, of someone who loved her enough to notice what brought her joy.
As they prepared for bed, going through the familiar routine they had established over years of marriage, Catherine watched William in the mirror as he hung up his tie and cufflinks. There was something she needed to say, something that had been building inside her since that rainy evening weeks ago.
"William," she said, turning to face him fully, "I need you to know that I see you too." He paused in the middle of unbuttoning his shirt, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I see the way you carry the weight of everyone's expectations without complaint. I see how you put duty first even when it costs you personally. I see the way you worry about your father's health, about the future of the monarchy, about whether you're making the right decisions for the country." Catherine moved closer to him, her voice growing more intense with each word. "I see how you balance being a father, a husband, and a future king, and somehow make it look effortless even though I know it isn't." William had stopped moving entirely, his attention completely focused on her words. "And I see how you love our children," Catherine continued. "The way you get down on the floor to play with them no matter how tired you are. The way you remember every little thing they tell you. George's fascination with helicopters, Charlotte's determination to master cartwheels, Lewis's obsession with construction vehicles. You're not just a good father because it's expected of you. You're a good father because you genuinely delight in them." William turned to face her fully, and Catherine was surprised to see emotion in his eyes. It occurred to her that while she had grown accustomed to his attention to her needs, she had perhaps not been as vocal about recognizing his strengths and sacrifices. "Most of all," she said, reaching up to touch his face, "I see how you've never once made me feel like I was a burden or a complication in your life. Even during the hardest times when the press was brutal or when I was struggling to find my place in all of this, you never wavered. You never made me feel like you regretted choosing me." "Catherine," William said quietly, his hands coming up to cover hers, "I could never regret choosing you. You're the best decision I ever made." "I know that now," she replied, "but I want you to know that you're mine too. The best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked me to build a life with you, even knowing how complicated that life would be." They stood there in the quiet of their bedroom, hands intertwined, sharing a moment of perfect understanding. Outside, London continued its restless rhythm, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new scrutiny, new opportunities to succeed or fail in the public eye. But inside their private sanctuary, they had this: recognition, gratitude, and a love that had only deepened with time and challenge. As they finally settled into bed, Catherine curled against William's side in the position that had become second nature to them over the years. She felt peaceful in a way that she hadn't experienced in months, not because her challenges had disappeared, but because she had gained a new appreciation for the partnership that would help her face whatever came next. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" William asked, his voice already drowsy. "For choosing me back," Catherine replied. "Every day in all the little ways, for making love feel safe." William's arms tightened around her and she felt him press a kiss to her hair. "Always," he murmured, and in that single word, she heard not just a promise for tonight, but a commitment that would carry them through whatever storms lay ahead. The defining moment came on an unremarkable Thursday in November, during what should have been a routine morning at Kensington Palace. Catherine had awakened feeling unwell, not seriously ill, but with the kind of persistent headache and general malaise that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Under normal circumstances, she might have pushed through, as she had learned to do over the years, but her schedule that day included a particularly important engagement: the opening of a new children's hospital wing that she had been instrumental in planning. William had already left for an early morning meeting with Commonwealth representatives, and Catherine found herself alone with her thoughts and her growing anxiety about the day ahead. The hospital opening was significant not just because of the media attention it would receive, but because she had worked closely with the medical team and families involved. She knew how much the event meant to the people who would be there, and the thought of disappointing them by being anything less than fully present and energetic felt unbearable. As she sat at her dressing table, trying to summon the energy to begin her morning routine, Catherine caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked pale and tired, and despite her best efforts with makeup, she knew the cameras would be unforgiving. More troubling was the realization that she genuinely wasn't sure she could give the engagement the attention and enthusiasm it deserved. It was then that her phone buzzed with a call from William. He was between meetings, he explained, but something in his voice suggested this wasn't just a casual check-in. "How are you feeling?" he asked, and there was a quality to the question that made Catherine suspect he already knew the answer. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then paused. After their recent conversations about recognizing and appreciating each other's care, the lie felt wrong. "Actually, I'm not fine. I have this terrible headache and I just feel off. At the hospital opening." "Can wait," William interrupted gently. "Catherine, you don't have to push through everything. Sometimes the most responsible thing is to acknowledge when you're not at your best." "But all those people are expecting me," Catherine protested. "The families, the medical staff, the children who are supposed to get the tour. I can't just not show up." "You're not just not showing up," William replied. "You're making a decision to ensure that when you do appear, you can give them the attention they deserve." There's a difference. Catherine wanted to argue, but even as she formed the words, she knew he was right. She had attended events while unwell before, and while she had managed to fulfill her basic obligations, she knew she hadn't been able to connect with people the way she normally did. The children especially seemed to sense when adults weren't fully present, and they deserved better than her going through the motions. "What would we tell them?" she asked. "The media will have a field day if I cancel at the last minute." "We tell them the truth," William said simply. "That you're unwell and want to reschedule so you can give the hospital opening the attention it deserves. And if the media wants to criticize you for being human, then they can answer to me." There was something in his tone, protective but not possessive, firm but not controlling, that made Catherine's heart skip. This wasn't him making decisions for her. It was him giving her permission to make the decision she already knew was right, but was afraid to make alone. "I'll call my private secretary and ask her to reschedule," Catherine said. "But William, you're in the middle of important meetings. You don't need to." "I'm already heading home," he interrupted. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "You don't need to come home," Catherine protested, though part of her was deeply touched that he wanted to. "I'm just going to rest. You have responsibilities." "So do I," William replied. "And right now my most important responsibility is making sure my wife feels supported when she's unwell." After they hung up, Catherine sat quietly in their bedroom, processing what had just happened. In her previous relationships, before William, admitting weakness or canceling plans had often been met with frustration or disappointment. She had learned to power through discomfort rather than risk being seen as unreliable or high maintenance. But William's response had been immediate support, practical problem-solving, and a willingness to rearrange his own commitments to be with her. True to his word, William arrived home 20 minutes later, appearing in their bedroom doorway with a concerned expression and a cup of the specific herbal tea that helped with her headaches. He had clearly made a stop in the kitchen, and Catherine realized that someone, probably him, had briefed the staff about her condition and ensured that everything she might need was readily available. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling beside her on the bed and handing her the warm mug. "Better, now that the pressure is off," Catherine admitted. "I didn't realize how much I was dreading trying to be on today when I felt so off." "You shouldn't have to dread anything," William said, reaching out to feel her forehead with the back of his hand in a gesture so naturally caring that it made Catherine's eyes well up with tears. "I'm not running a fever," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "Just feeling human, I suppose. Being human is allowed," William replied seriously. "In fact, it's required. The people we serve don't need us to be perfect, Catherine. They need us to be genuine. And you can't be genuine if you're forcing yourself to perform when you're not well." As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself observing William with the same newfound awareness that had been developing over recent weeks. He canceled his afternoon appointments without fanfare, delegating what could be delegated and rescheduling what couldn't. When she protested that she felt guilty about disrupting his day, he looked at her with genuine surprise. "Catherine, do you remember when I had food poisoning during that trade visit to India?" he asked. She did remember. William had been violently ill but had been determined to attend a crucial dinner with business leaders. Catherine had been the one to insist he stay in the hotel, and she had represented both of them at the dinner, delivering remarks she had helped him prepare and ensuring that the relationships they had gone there to build were maintained. "You didn't hesitate for a second to step in," William continued. "You saw what needed to be done, and you did it. That's what partnership means. We take care of each other, and we cover for each other when needed. But that was different, Catherine said. You were really sick. And you're unwell now, William replied. Maybe not in the same way, but unwell enough that pushing through would have cost you more than it was worth. There's no hierarchy of suffering, Catherine. If you need to rest, then you rest. That afternoon, while Catherine slept off her headache, William worked quietly in the sitting room adjoining their bedroom, handling correspondence and phone calls in a voice low enough not to disturb her, but close enough that she could sense his presence. When she woke feeling significantly better, she found him reading briefing papers with a cup of tea growing cold beside him. Better? He asked, looking up from his documents with immediate attention. Much better, Catherine replied truthfully. Thank you for staying with me. I know you had important things to do. This is the book. It's about history. Thank you for staying with me. I know you had important things to do. I know you had important things to do. I took care of my wife. Everything else was just work. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Catherine found herself reflecting on the day's events with a sense of profound gratitude that had nothing to do with dramatic gestures or grand romantic moments. William's response to her illness had been practical, immediate, and completely focused on her well-being rather than the inconvenience her condition might cause. William, she said, as they settled into bed, can I tell you something? Always, he replied, turning to face her in the dim light filtering through their curtains. Today, when I was feeling awful and worried about disappointing people, you made it safe for me to be human, Catherine said. You didn't make me feel guilty for being unwell, or selfish for needing to rest. You just made it okay. William reached for her hand under the covers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become their nighttime ritual. You do the same for me, he said quietly. Do you remember last month when I was struggling with that speech about mental health awareness? Catherine did remember. William had been working on remarks for a major conference, but he was having difficulty finding the right tone, personal enough to be meaningful, but not so personal as to be inappropriate for his position. She had found him in his study at 2 a.m, surrounded by crumpled drafts, looking frustrated and defeated. You sat with me until sunrise, helping me find the words, William continued. Not because you had to, but because you could see I was struggling, and you wanted to help. You never once suggested I was overthinking it or being difficult. Because you weren't being difficult, Catherine said. You were trying to do justice to something important to you. Exactly, William replied. And that's what you were doing today too. You weren't being weak or demanding. You were trying to do justice to your commitments by ensuring you could meet them properly. They lay quietly for a few minutes, hands linked, each processing the deeper understanding they had reached about their relationship. It wasn't just about the big moments, the proposals and weddings and births and celebrations that made headlines. It was about the accumulation of small choices to prioritize each other's well-being, to create safety for vulnerability, to offer support without judgment.
I love you, Catherine said into the darkness, but the words carried more weight than the simple declaration usually did.
She was saying she loved not just him but this, the way he loved her, the way they had learned to love each other. I love you too, William replied, and she heard in his voice the same depth of gratitude and recognition. As Catherine drifted toward sleep, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From that first rainy evening when she had doubted her place in royal life, through the gradual recognition of all the ways William cared for her, to today's experience of being allowed to be imperfect and still completely supported. She realized that the gesture that had shown her she was deeply cherished wasn't any single moment, but rather the accumulated evidence of years of consistent, thoughtful love. The next morning, Catherine woke feeling completely restored and energetic. A hospital opening was rescheduled for the following week, and when the day came, she was able to be fully present for every moment, engaging with the children, listening to the family's stories, celebrating the medical staff's dedication. The extra attention she could give because she was properly rested made the event more meaningful for everyone involved. Later, when William asked her how the day had gone, Catherine realized she had an answer that captured everything she had learned about love and partnership over recent months. It went perfectly, she said, because I knew that if it hadn't, that would have been okay too. And in William's understanding smile, she saw reflected back to her the very quality that made her feel cherished. The security of being loved not just for her successes and strengths, but for her full humanity, including the moments when she needed to rest, to doubt, to be cared for rather than caring for others. That, Catherine realized, was the truest form of royal warmth, not the kind that came from titles or ceremonies, but the kind that existed in the quiet spaces between public moments, in the steady presence of someone who chose, again and again, to make love feel safe.